It was December 9th, 1971, and I still remember that night like it happened yesterday. I was sitting behind my desk on the Tonight Show stage, just like I had done hundreds of times before. The audience was alive, cameras were rolling, everything felt normal, predictable, safe. And then Bruce Lee walked out. You have to understand something about that moment. Bruce wasn't just another guest. Even before he said a single word, the room changed. There was a kind of energy with him, calm, focused, almost unreal. He shook my hand, and I remember thinking, this guy doesn't move like other people. It was like every motion had a purpose, nothing wasted. We started the interview like any other night. I asked questions. He answered with that quiet confidence of his. The audience was enjoying it, laughing, reacting. Everything was flowing exactly the way television is supposed to flow. But what I didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that something else was already happening. Something Bruce Lee could see, and I couldn't. Before I continue, I just want you to picture this clearly. Bright studio lights, a live audience, cameras rolling, millions watching at home. And in the middle of all that entertainment, something serious was about to break through. Now, I was doing my job, making jokes, keeping things light. That was always my job. Make people laugh. That's what they expected from me. But Bruce, he wasn't laughing as much anymore. I noticed it, even in the middle of conversation. His eyes kept studying me. Not in a casual way, but like he was reading something I couldn't see myself. At first I thought maybe it was just his personality. He was intense like that, focused. But then something shifted. Mid-interview, he suddenly went quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet. It was different. He stopped responding to the rhythm of the show. The audience didn't notice yet, but I did. And then he looked directly at me. Not at the audience, not at the cameras, at me. And he said something that I will never forget. Mr. Carson, please stand up. For a moment, I actually thought it was part of a joke, because that's what television is. You expect timing, comedy, surprise moments. So I smiled a little and tried to play it off, but Bruce didn't smile back. That's when I realized this wasn't a performance. Something was serious. I stood up slowly, still confused, still trying to understand what was happening. The audience was quiet now. You could feel the change in the room, that shift when people stop laughing and start paying attention differently. Bruce stepped closer, and then he did something I didn't expect at all. He took my arm. Not aggressively, not forcefully, but with this calm precision, like he knew exactly what he was doing. He held my wrist between his fingers, and then he went still, completely still. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Even the studio felt like it had frozen. And then he asked me a question that changed everything. When was the last time you saw a doctor? Now, I tried to laugh it off. That's what I always did in moments like that. Keep it light. Keep control. But he didn't let it go. He repeated it, calmer, this time, but more serious. Your heart, when was it checked? And I remember feeling something shift inside me. Because suddenly, it wasn't a show anymore. It felt personal. Very personal. I told him I felt fine. I even mentioned a little chest pain I had earlier that day, just casually, like it meant nothing. But the moment I said it, I saw his expression change completely. That was the moment everything stopped being entertainment. The studio went quiet in a way I had never experienced before. Not the usual TV silence, but real silence. The kind where nobody even moves. Bruce looked at me and said something I didn't fully understand at first. He told me my pulse was irregular. He said it wasn't normal. And then he said something that made the entire atmosphere collapse into seriousness. There is something wrong with your heart. I remember laughing nervously again, trying to escape it, because that's what people do when they don't want to believe something uncomfortable. But Bruce wasn't guessing. He wasn't entertaining. He was warning me. And I didn't know it yet, but he was right. He turned to the audience and asked if there was a doctor present. I still remember thinking, this has gone too far. This is live television. This can't be real. But then someone stood up, a cardiologist, and everything changed again. The doctor came on stage, checked me, and within moments his face turned serious. Completely serious. He confirmed what Bruce had already felt. My heart wasn't right. There was something happening inside my body that I had ignored. Something dangerous, something real. And just like that, the show stopped being a show. I remember looking around the studio and seeing people who had come there to laugh, now completely silent, confused, concerned. And I'll be honest with you, I was scared. Not dramatically, not loudly, but deep inside. Because for the first time that night, I couldn't joke my way out of it. Bruce stayed beside me the whole time, calm, focused, like he had already accepted what was happening before anyone else did. And that's when I realized something about him. He wasn't reacting like a guest on a talk show. He was reacting like someone trying to prevent something worse, something he had seen before. The doctors eventually said I needed to go to the hospital, immediately. And that's when I made a decision I had never made in my entire career. I ended the show early, right there, live, no script, no ending joke, no goodbye monologue, just truth. And as I walked off that stage, I remember something very clearly. Bruce Lee didn't leave my side. He walked with me like he wasn't a guest anymore, but like he was responsible for making sure I got through that night alive. And I didn't fully understand it then, but that was the moment everything in my life started to change. Something in that moment changed inside the entire studio. I remember looking at Bruce Lee, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see a guest on my show. I saw a man who was not performing. He wasn't joking, he wasn't entertaining, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was focused on me like my life actually mattered more than the cameras rolling around us. And that alone was enough to make my smile disappear. I tried to play it off at first. That's what I always did. That's what I was trained to do, turn everything into a joke. Keep the rhythm of the show alive, keep America comfortable. But Bruce didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just stepped closer and said again, very calmly, "Please stand up, Mr. Carson." Carson, Carson said again, very calmly, "Please stand up, Mr. Rizzy." There was something in his voice I can't explain even today. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't dramatic. It was certain. Like he already knew something about me that I didn't know about myself. And slowly, I stood up. I remember my hands slightly shaking, but I kept smiling because the audience was watching. You never let them see fear. That was rule number one. But Bruce wasn't looking at the audience anymore. He was looking at my body, not my face, not my words, my body. He stepped closer and gently raised his hand. "Your left arm," he said. "May I?" I nodded without thinking. And that's when he held my wrist. 2 fingers. Very light pressure, almost like he was listening to something under my skin. The studio went quiet in a way I had never heard before. Even the audience stopped moving. I remember thinking, this is strange. This is very strange. But then I saw his expression change. His eyes softened first, then tightened, like he had found something he didn't want to find. He looked up at me and asked one question. "When did you last see a doctor?" I laughed a little. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. "I see my dentist regularly," I said. A few people in the audience chuckled, but Bruce didn't even react. He just pressed slightly again on my wrist and said, "Your heart, when was it checked?" And suddenly, the laughter died. I felt something shift, not outside, inside me, because now it wasn't a joke anymore. It was serious, very serious. I tried to hold my ground. I said, "Bruce, we're on live television." But he interrupted me, not rudely, just firmly. "Your pulse is irregular." That line hit differently, because when someone says something like that about your heart, you don't joke anymore, you listen. I looked at Ed McMahon. He looked confused. The director in the booth was probably panicking, but Bruce wasn't panicking. He was sure. He told me again, "There is something wrong in your cardiovascular system," and then he said something I didn't expect. "I can feel it." Now, I want to be honest with you. In that moment, I almost dismissed it. Almost. But there was something about how calm he was that stopped me from ignoring him. It wasn't ego. It wasn't attention-seeking. It was concern. Real concern. And that's when I remembered something. A small moment. Earlier that day. A sharp pain in my chest. Just for a few seconds. I had ignored it, like most people do. I told myself it was stress. Coffee, work, anything but what it actually was. But now, standing under those lights, I wasn't so sure anymore. Bruce noticed my silence. He stepped slightly back and looked toward the audience. And then he did something I didn't expect at all. He called out very clearly, "Is there a doctor in the audience?" That sentence changed everything. The entire studio shifted. People started looking around. Whispers. Confusion. Shock. This wasn't a show anymore, it was something else. And then a man stood up. A cardiologist. He identified himself, Dr. Robert Mitchell. And I remember thinking, this is getting real now. Too real. He came up to the stage, and Bruce immediately stepped aside like he had done his job, like he had passed responsibility to someone more qualified. The doctor checked my pulse again. His face changed instantly. That's a moment I will never forget. because doctors don't usually look alarmed on live television. But he did. He asked me questions. Chest pain? Yes. Earlier today. Shortness of breath? Maybe. I wasn't sure. Fatigue? Yes. More than usual. And then he looked at me and said the words that made my stomach drop. You need to go to a hospital tonight. Silence. No applause, no laughter, nothing. Just silence. I looked at Bruce, and I'll never forget his face in that moment. Not fear, not panic, relief. Like he had been holding his breath the entire time, and finally someone confirmed what he already knew. The director cut the energy immediately. Someone tried to speak through the headset, but Johnny Carson, the host, was gone now. All that was left was a man standing under bright studio lights, hearing for the first time that something inside his body might be failing. And I said the only thing I could say, we should end the show. My voice sounded distant to me, like it belonged to someone else. And just like that, the camera stopped focusing on jokes and started focusing on a life, a real one, not scripted, not planned, just real. But what happened after that moment, when the lights dimmed and the audience was sent away, that's when everything truly began. Because Bruce didn't leave, he stayed. And what he did next would change how I understood life forever. The moment the studio emptied, everything felt different. The lights didn't feel like lights anymore. They felt heavy, like they were pressing down on me. I was still standing there, trying to act normal, trying to convince myself this was just a misunderstanding. But my body wasn't listening to my thoughts anymore. It was quiet. Too quiet. Bruce didn't leave. He stayed close. Not like a guest, like someone who refused to let go of a problem he had already seen too clearly. Ed McMahon kept asking if I was okay. The crew kept moving around in confusion, but I wasn't really hearing them properly. My focus kept going back to one thing, my heartbeat. I could feel it now, not just metaphorically. I could actually feel it, and that scared me more than anything Bruce had said. An ambulance was called. I remember refusing at first. Pride does that to you. You think you're fine even when you're not. But Bruce looked at me and said something very simple. You are not going alone. And somehow, I believed him. The ride to the hospital felt longer than it should have. The sirens outside, the flashing lights, everything felt distant. Bruce sat beside me, quiet, calm, holding my hand like it was the most normal thing in the world. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. I wasn't Johnny Carson, the host. I was just Johnny. A man in a fragile body, trying to understand what was happening to him. I remember asking him, how did you know? He didn't answer immediately, he just looked out the window for a moment. Then he said, it wasn't knowledge alone, it was feeling. I didn't fully understand that then. I just nodded, because I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. When we arrived at the hospital, everything moved fast. Doctors, monitors, questions, needles, machines I didn't want to look at. Bruce stayed in the room the entire time. Even when they told him to wait outside, he refused. Not aggressively, just firmly, like he had already decided I wasn't going through this alone. And then came the tests, one after another. Long minutes turned into hours. At some point, I lost track of time completely. All I remember is sitting there, staring at a white wall, waiting for someone to tell me something I didn't want to hear. Finally, the doctor came in. His face said everything before his words did. He spoke slowly, carefully. Mr. Carson, there is significant blockage in your coronary arteries. I didn't fully understand the medical terms at first, but I understood the tone. Serious. Very serious. He continued. You are at risk of a major heart event. That sentence, I will never forget it, because it didn't feel like information. It felt like a warning from life itself, a warning I almost didn't get in time. I turned to Bruce, and I saw something in his face I didn't expect. Not surprise, not shock, but sadness, deep sadness, like he had seen this ending before and fought to stop it from happening again. He whispered something to himself, almost like a regret. I was right, I asked him quietly. How did you even sense it? He finally sat down next to me, and for the first time that night, his voice softened. He said, when I touched your wrist, I didn't just feel a pulse. I felt an imbalance, not just physical, but internal. He paused, then added something I still think about even today. The body speaks before the person accepts the truth. I didn't know what to say to that, because part of me wanted to believe it, and part of me was still trying to process that I had almost died without even knowing it. Hours passed, More doctors came, more discussions, and finally, the conclusion was clear. I needed immediate treatment, possibly surgery. Nothing could be ignored anymore. Everything I had been postponing in life had suddenly caught up to me in one night. At some point, Bruce leaned back in the chair, and for the first time, I saw him look tired. Not physically, emotionally. He said quietly, "I have seen this before." My teacher ignored the signs, and I stayed silent. His voice broke slightly, just for a moment. Then he continued, "I promised myself I would never stay silent again." That stayed with me, because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about me, it was about him too. Something in his past, something he couldn't fix, had brought him here tonight. Not by accident, but by purpose. And somehow, I had become part of that unfinished story. The night didn't end in the hospital room, it just shifted. From fear to realization, from confusion to truth. And I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of what that night would change. Not just for me, but for him too. After that night, nothing in my life felt the same anymore. Not the studio, not the show, not even myself. I spent the night in the hospital under constant monitoring, machines around me, doctors coming and going, whispers in hallways I couldn't fully hear. But one thing never changed. Bruce was still there, sitting quietly, watching everything. Not like a guest, not like a celebrity, but like someone who refused to leave a moment that had already become bigger than both of us. At some point in the early morning hours, I asked him something I couldn't stop thinking about. "Why did you really do it?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the floor like he was choosing his words carefully. Then he said, "Because I lost someone once." That sentence changed the air in the room. He continued slowly, "My teacher, I saw the signs in him, but I was young. I didn't speak up, and then it was too late." He paused, and I could hear something in his voice I had never heard before. Regret, real regret. He looked at me and said, "When I touched your wrist, I recognized it. The same pattern, the same warning." And I couldn't stay silent this time. I didn't know what to say. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about medicine. It wasn't just about my heart. It was about him carrying something from his past and trying to correct it through me. Hours passed. My condition was stable, but uncertain. Doctors talked about surgery options, tests, recovery plans. Everything sounded distant, like it was happening to someone else. At one point, I remember asking Bruce, "Do you really believe you can feel things like that?" He nodded slowly, not proudly, just simply. He said, "It's not magic, it's attention. The body never lies. You just have to know how to listen." I leaned back and closed my eyes for a moment, because part of me still wanted to dismiss it. But another part of me, the part that had felt that chest pain earlier, the part that had ignored it, that part was finally quiet. For the first time, Bruce stayed through the morning. Even when doctors told him he could leave. Even when reporters outside started asking questions. Even when the world outside that hospital room continued like nothing had happened. He stayed. And somewhere in those hours, something changed between us. Not spoken, not planned, just understood. I wasn't just a patient to him, and he wasn't just a guest on my show. We were two men connected by a moment neither of us expected. Before he finally left later that day, he said something I still remember word for word. Life gives warnings quietly. If you are too busy performing, you miss them. Then he looked at me and added, "You didn't miss this one." And then he walked out, just like that. No drama, no attention, just silence. In the days that followed, I started thinking differently. About work, about pressure, about how often I ignored my own body just to keep others entertained. Doctors explained my condition in more detail later. They said I had been dangerously close to a major heart event, closer than I ever imagined. And I kept thinking, if Bruce hadn't noticed, if he hadn't spoken up, I might not have been here to hear any of it. That thought stayed with me. But something else stayed even deeper. The fact that someone, a guest, a stranger in some ways, had cared more about my life in that moment than I had myself. And that realization slowly began to change me. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The show went on later, but I didn't go back the same way. I couldn't, because now, every laugh, every joke, every moment on that stage, it meant something different, something real, something fragile. And I started to understand what Bruce had been trying to teach me without even using words. That being strong doesn't mean ignoring pain. It means recognizing it in time and listening before it becomes something you can't undo. After everything that happened that night, I thought the story had already ended. But life doesn't really end moments like that. It carries them forward, quietly, for years. Bruce and I stayed in touch after that. Not constantly, not publicly, just privately. He would check in sometimes, short calls, short visits, simple conversations that somehow always felt deeper than anything I had ever said on television. He never treated me like Johnny Carson, the host, again. To him, I was just a man who had been given a second chance, and I never forgot that. My recovery took time. Doctors changed my lifestyle completely. Diet, stress, work schedule. Everything had to be adjusted. At first, I resisted. That's what I always did. But slowly, I started listening, not just to doctors, but to myself, to my body, to silence. Something Bruce had taught me without ever forcing it. Then came the news I never wanted to hear. Years later, Bruce was gone. Sudden, unexpected. The same kind of silence he once saved me from now surrounded his own life. I remember sitting in my home when I heard it. And I didn't speak for a long time, because it didn't feel real. The man who had stood in front of millions of people and stopped a live television show to save my life was no longer here. And in that moment, I finally understood something I had never fully understood before. He didn't just save my life physically, he changed the direction of it completely. I often think back to that night in 1971. The lights, the audience, the confusion, and a young man standing up saying 5 words that nobody expected. "Please stand up, Mr. Carson." At the time, I thought it was strange. Today, I understand it was something else. It was awareness. It was instinct. It was care. It was someone seeing a truth I was refusing to see in myself and acting on it, even if it meant breaking every rule of television, even if it meant risking everything. That's what I never forgot. Not the interruption, not the shock, but the intention behind it. Years later, when I finally retired from The Tonight Show, I was asked many times what I remembered most. People expected me to say the jokes, the celebrities, the fame, but I never did, because none of that stayed with me the way that night did. Instead, I said something very simple. I met a man who cared more about my life than my comfort, and that changed everything, because that's the truth. We spend so much of our lives pretending we're fine, smiling when we're not, performing when we're tired, ignoring signs we don't want to face, but sometimes life sends someone who refuses to let you keep pretending, and if you're lucky enough to listen, it can save you, or even transform you. Bruce Lee was that person for me. Not just a martial artist, not just a legend, but a reminder that real strength is not performance. It's awareness, it's honesty. It's caring enough to speak up when something feels wrong, even if the world is watching. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it changes everything. And today, when I look back at my life, I don't remember the applause the most. I don't remember the ratings. I don't remember the fame. I remember a moment of silence in a television studio, when a man chose truth over entertainment and saved a life because of it. That is what I carry with me. That is what I never forgot. And that is the real story.